Hello everyone. Welcome to the second
Hello.
day of the 2024 East Asia Youth Summit Forum. And I'm Sarah Yang, and I am one of the presidents of EAYS 2024, as well as a rising sophomore at Columbia University. So, the East Asia Youth Summit is a student-run organization dedicated to reimagining East Asian history and highlighting Asian culture, heritage, and voices. And thanks to the many support from professors, scholars, and mentors, we have been able to grow and thrive. Our team consists of passionate students from China, Hong Kong, Canada, the United States, Japan, France, etc. And currently, we organize youth communication events in both community and academic settings, and we produce papers and projects to encourage East Asian youth to engage with important issues. Yesterday's forum has been a blast. From the opening speech from Ms. Tomiko Dagen to the inspiring stories of Siling Yun by Professor Saucy, we are incredibly grateful to be able to learn about East Asia from various perspectives. And the forum is also making an unexpected impact. As Jeffrey just mentioned, the Tencent live stream selling tone from yesterday had 451 audiences. As we're not now on day 2, which is the last day of the forum, let's look forward to more transcendental lectures and speeches, as well as project presentations made by award-winning students. And please welcome Panel Three's moderator, Cassidy Dong.
I've heard that Cassidy might be facing some technical issues, but I can help. I will help with that.
That'd
So
be
yeah,
great.
all right. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the third session of the East Asia Youth Summit 2024. It's called Social Frictions, and I will serve as your moderator for the session. Then, social frictions in the Asian, specifically East Asian communities, arise from intergenerational conflicts, cultural assimilation challenges, and intercommunity diversity, among other clashes and conflicts that uh, confronts all societies in the modern era. It truly is a complex and intersectional area of academic exploration, worthy of much of our time and efforts to explore. And today, we will delve into the intersections of gender, family, and music within the context of East Asian culture and society. And we do have here with us a very esteemed panel of speakers who will share their insights and research on these topics. I want to thank Professor Borovoy, Professor Jiang, and Mrs. Gu again for joining us today. It's truly an honor on our behalf. And our session is structured as follows. We will begin with presentations from our three speakers, followed by, hopefully with time, a panel discussion and a Q&A session. So those of you on Zoom with us, you have the privilege of submitting questions directly to me. And I will relay them to our esteemed speakers, if possible, and our audience on Xiaotong can also propose questions to our tech support staff, and hopefully I'll relay that as well. And with that being said, commencing this session for us first will be Professor Borovoy of Japanese Anthropology from Princeton University. As a recipient of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission National Endowment for the Humanities Social Science Fellowship, the Japan Foundation Fellowship for Long-Term Research, among many more, Professor Borovoy also published monographs such as The Too Good Wife, Alcohol, Codependence, and the Politics of Nurturance in Post-War Japan, which concerns women's work in containing the social harms of heavy drinking. Her most recent research, it looks at aging and the ethics of brain death and the deceased, and the living organ donation in Japan, and more broadly on the topics of gender, age, and modern Japanese developments. Uh, Professor Borovoy's current book manuscript project is an analysis of how post-war U.S. social scientists came to terms with Japan's commitments to community, society, and family welfare. At Princeton, Professor Borovoy is a faculty affiliate with the Global Japan Lab, Center for Health and Well-Being, Global Health Program, and University Center for Human Values. Now, with all that being said, let us please welcome Professor Borovoy to speak about the aging population, gender, and women's status in Japan in light of the recent COVID pandemic.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for your invitation. Excuse me. And for welcoming me to the summit. I have a few thoughts I'd like to share. And was thinking about a topic that might be relevant to everyone, whether you study Japan, China, Korea, or whether you live and work in those places. And I think it's a topic that everyone should be thinking about as something that a problem that will be all addressing as we continue to move forward. So let's see. You're sharing my slides, so if I can share my own, that might be a little
Yeah.
bit easier.
Yes, sir.
Let's see if I can get that to work though. Here we go. Okay. So is that working? Everyone can see the slides? Okay, great. No. Okay, wait, hang on. No, you should be able to.
I can see it.
Okay.
I can see it. So
Professor Taifei,
maybe if you go the second one, maybe
I'll try the next one and see if how's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start here then. So I want to just begin by kind of thinking about the problem of women and care and work. I think it's a really interesting universal problem that different societies solve in different ways. And I think East Asian societies are a really fascinating starting point to think about this question of work-life balance and, women's role in society more broadly, and also sometimes how the demands on women, particularly as laborers and also as parents, come into conflict with one another. So I want to start by thinking about Japan, which is the place that I know best. And just to kind of back up a little bit, I just want to kind of remind everyone that in Japanese modern history, that is going back to going back as far as the turn of the 20th century, but then really crystallizing as the century gets going, Japanese women have played a kind of supportive and subordinate role in the workplace. They were recruited as laborers from an early moment in Japan's modernization in, for example, the textile industry or in piecework. So women have worked all along in the context of Japan's modernity, and of course before that on farmlands in agricultural work. But they've often worked in these kind of segregated sectors. And that pattern has continued to be present moving into the 20th century, and it really crystallized after World War II in the context of Japan's post-war economic growth, when women were really recruited to be mainly homemakers, sometimes working, often working, but typically that would take the form of work until a woman got married for middle class women. And then a common pattern would be to kind of drop out of the labor force during the child rearing years, and then perhaps rejoin the labor force later in life after kids have grown up a little bit, but often in low skilled work. And so you can see this pattern in the graph I'm presenting here. It's often called an M curve. Now, of course, this isn't true for, there are women who work their entire lives, but this would be a more typical trajectory for middle class and upper middle class women. And so you can see labor force participation by age, and you can see the way this is slowly changing in Japan, so that the biggest dip in labor force participation around, the child rearing years, which is mid 20s to early 30s was in 1989. And you see that in 2019, we have a more rounded kind of an M curve. So more women are working, fewer women are dropping out. But nonetheless, there still is this dip. And if I showed you a comparison with other countries with women participating in the labor force, you would see that Japan is still kind of distinctive and that you see this little dip. The other thing I just want to emphasize is that although many women work in Japan, it would be a misconception to think that most Japanese women are simply stay-at-home parents who don't work. They typically do different kinds of work than men, and so 40% of um, of women are 40% of the part-time workers, female part-time workers, are in service positions. This chart is a little bit difficult to read, but if you just focus on the blue, this is a survey that was conducted of 1,000 working women. And the bars that you're seeing are percentages. So of the 1,000 women, 38% of them are in clerical work, 38.1%, and 40.7% are in sales or service positions. So by far, most of the women are in these kind of lower skilled positions. And then also the yellow bars represent workers who are working over 35 hours a week, and the orange are workers who are working under 35 hours a week. And so we see again the kind of larger segment of the population is working in the orange sector, which is in the yellow sector, which is under 35 hours a week. And just one more slide to give you a little bit of background. This is a survey that was conducted by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government fairly recently on division of labor within the home and time spent on household chores for men and women. And the sort of blue hatched area represents housework, shopping, etc. The green is child rearing, child care. And what we see on the left is the work that men do, and on the right column is the work that women do. To the far right is the last time the survey was conducted. But again, we see out of a sample of 1,000 people that women are performing far more work of both kinds, but particularly child rearing, than men. Specifically, 6 hours and 10 minutes on average weekdays and weekends for child rearing, and 2.5 on shopping. And the difference between men and women is about 5 hours and 20 minutes. So this kind of takes us towards this conversation of what's happening in Japan more broadly with respect to the population pyramid. And just simply to remind everyone that Japan is an aging society, much like other societies, China and Korea. Japan is doing it faster, and it's farther advanced in its aging. So here's the population pyramid as of 2020. And the red section are, people over age 75. Orange is between 65 and 75. And so you see that, again, in 25 years or so, this is going to look very different. It will be extremely top heavy. Already 1/3 of the population of Japan is over age 65. And if you want to sort of imagine what this is looking like over time, you can sort of watch this GIF file, which goes all the way up to 2065. So this is the scenario the Japanese government is looking at. And in response to this kind of scary moving population pyramid, the government is moving into action to encourage women both to have more children in order to populate the bottom of the pyramid, and also to join the labor force, because there will be a pressing labor shortage in Japan. And in fact, for some jobs, there already is. But we see that women are hesitating. Women are getting married later than they ever have. And partly as a result of getting married later than they ever have, they're having fewer children. So the total fertility rate in Japan today is about 1.3. And this graph, I don't have time to linger on it too much, but it is very striking, particularly if we look at these middle curves, the orange curve, which is women between the ages of 25 and 29. We see that in 1990, 40% of women of that age were unmarried, but in 2015, 61% of women that age are unmarried. That's a 20 percentage leap over the course of um, 34 years. So it's pretty significant. And same with the green. So women are getting married later and they're having fewer children. And I think that in some ways, this is an indication of the fact that they're trying to figure out how to make ends meet in terms of both having a family and also maintaining their employment ambitions. I'm going to skip to here. Once Prime Minister Abe was elected in 2012, he began this very active campaign to encourage women to work. There's a lot of imagery like what you're seeing here, encouraging women to both raise children and work. And if you go to the bottom of this little sort of infomercial, it says, should I work or should I raise a family? No, you can work and raise a family. And Abe had an ambition to achieve 30% of the managerial labor force would be women by the year. I forget where he set his goal. Actually, it might have been 2020, but Japan didn't, even come close to achieving that. So in the last few minutes that I have, I just kind of want to reflect in a historical and social way on why I think it's hard for women to figure out how to balance these competing demands. And I think in order to make sense of that, we have to remember the history of women's labor and also sort of gender definitions of selfhood dating back to the Meiji period. Because Meiji leaders in the latter part of the 19th century were very explicit about women's duties at home. And not only did they see women's work at home as important domestic skills, child rearing, home budgeting, literacy, hygiene, public health, neighborhood public safety, and those kinds of issues. Not only did they emphasize those skills as important for kind of women's roles, they emphasized those skills as necessary to Japan's modernization. So from a very early moment, Japanese political officials were linking women's labor at home to Japan's own political ambitions. And bureaucrats like Moriarty Nordi and others were saying things like, women's work at home will define the nation of Japan. If we desire children of fine character and disposition, then their mother by all means should also attain similar perfection. And in the Meiji period, Moriarty Nordi and others talked about women not just as kind of domestic beings, but as actually civil servants of the state whose skills would contribute to Japan's own modernization. And we have to remember that women's labor was also solicited on the part of the Japanese government during wartime. And again, that was very explicit that women were raising children to send them off to fight, and that raising a child to be a soldier was part of the nature of being a woman in Japan. So this kind of connection between women's skills at home and national projects has been very explicit over the course of Japanese history. I would say that we still can see a lot of connections between this history and patterns of labor today. most women who work also do most of the housework. There was just this incredibly interesting piece published in the New York Times, well, not just, a couple of years ago now, by Motoko Rich about the kinds of work that women actually do in Japan as homemakers. And she argued that it's much more consuming and demanding than the work that many other homemakers do in other countries. That she has to pack, crafts materials and hand labeled goods for her children's school. She has to participate in a lot of their work at home. She has to bring fresh linens to the daycare every week. She rides them to school, to daycare on her bicycle. And also, furthermore, that her husband is rarely around to help. So Motoko Rich in this piece followed Mrs. Nishimura, and she kind of shows different scenes of her life and just how demanding it is. She tells the story of how one day when she was carrying all these linens down the stairs of her apartment building to take them in, she actually slipped and sprained her ankle and was out of commission for a while. And just kind of how the whole process of working and caring for her children has slowly become almost too overwhelming for her. Women do other things. They care for the elderly in Japan in very intimate ways. More elderly live at home in Japan than they do in many other countries. Some of these elderly are bedridden or debilitated in other ways, and women provide disproportionate amounts of care for the elderly. So, part of the point that I kind of want to wrap up with here is simply that when we hear calls for women in Japan or elsewhere to join the labor force, those are often very compelling calls. Feminists, particularly Western feminists, the mass media will always jump on those ideas as a positive development. But we have to remember that women have multiple competing commitments and that there's a strong sense of a history and also a sense of purpose attached to those commitments. And I think it will be really difficult for women to change some of those habits. Women are also involved in community events, including recycling, various kinds of sustainability and ecology projects. They educate neighborhood communities. They participate in neighborhood groups like this Jichitai, which does a lot of volunteering, pretty sophisticated recycling campaigns. If you've ever lived in Japan, you know that garbage gets divided into multiple different categories every week. You have to educate yourself depending on the neighborhood that you live in. And women also do a lot, as we know, to raise children. Volumes have been written about the work that women do, and I think there are some commonalities here between Japan and other parts of Asia, of course, to help children through the examination system. And of course, that's not only to provide an education for a child, but also to produce upward mobility for the family, because once a child succeeds in school, they succeed ideally in their workplace, and then they end up paying that back to the family that raised them in various ways. Japan's not allowing enough immigration to compensate for women's labor, so women's labor is still required at home to care for children and the elderly. And American feminists, I think, have never appreciated the commitments that Japanese women have shown to being good homemakers. I don't think Japanese society would look the way it does if women migrated to the labor force in the way that second wave American feminists have been advocating since the 1960s. And I also don't think they would recognize the description of domesticity and femininity that American feminists like Betty Friedan described in the 1960s, which was this picture of women as kind of mindless and fluffy, focused only on domestic tasks, not outward facing, not educated, and so forth. So it's really those thoughts that I would like to leave everyone with today, to think about how we might move forward in the face of these complicated problems, which do not have simple solutions. But I do agree with Ueno Chizuko, a very famous Japanese feminist, that we're not going to solve these problems by simply calling for women to join the labor force. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Borova. Your insights are truly remarkably amazing, and yeah, lots of stuff I personally haven't learned about before, and I really appreciate your insights. And so next, we welcome Professor Jiang to present to us on the topic of urban entertainment culture as a frontier for friction between the genders. Professor Jinjiang is with a PhD in East Asian history from Stanford and a Master's of Arts in Modern Chinese History from East China Normal University, researches women, gender, popular culture, and Shanghai history. Professor Jiang has authored Women Playing Men, Yue Opera, and Social Change in 20th Century Shanghai, and numerous published articles in English and Chinese. And recently, she and her graduate students published Newspaper Entertainment Advertisement in Shanghai, a source book, 1907 to 1966, documenting the evolution of Shanghai's urban culture. And with that being introduced, let's welcome Professor Jiang to present her talk to us.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey, for the introduction and for the invitation for me to speak to your cohorts. I'm very happy to be here to share some of my research with the students. So today I'm going to talk about life and love, marriage and the family in China in urban entertainment. I will basically use two films as a way of introducing some different perspectives and conceptions of love and life in East Asian society and modern American society. So without further ado, let's begin with a Hollywood film from last year, Past Lives. I don't know how many of you have watched that film. It's a very good film. I think it's also get some awards from I think a Golden Globe and also Hollywood. Yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly what the awards it got, but it's a very good movie. So this past life on the right hand side, right? So you see these two main characters. So it's a movie made by a Chinese Canadian director, Celine Song, and it tells a triangle love story across the Pacific Ocean. So I just introduce in case you haven't watched it. So the synopsis. So in 2000 in Seoul, South Korea, Nora, and Nora is this woman's name, and Hai Song is the guy here. They were 12 years old classmates who developed feelings for one another and go on a date set up by their parents. So it's like two families are very close and the two kids are very close with each other. Shortly thereafter, however, Nora's family immigrates to Toronto and the two lose contact. So they grow up separately. And 12 years later, in 2012, Hare has finished his military service. You know, as we all know, in South Korea, young men are obliged to have military service. So when he finished his military service, right, and in the meantime, Nora has moved to New York City. So one day, Nora discovers on Facebook that Hare had posted that he was looking for Nora. And then they reconnected through video calls, but are unable to visit each other as Nora plans to attend a writer's retreat in Montauk, and Hare is moving to China for a Mandarin language exchange. Eventually, Nora tells Hare they should stop talking for a while as she wants to focus on her writing and life in New York. So after her retreat, Nora meets Arthur and they fall in love. So Arthur is a Chinese, Jewish American who also attended the writers' retreat. So they fall in love and they yeah, right. So these two fall in love at the writers' retreat. And here, on the other hand, also meets a woman whom he begins to date. 12 more years pass, right? So 12 years, right? So it's like now, right? So if you do the math, they are about 36 years old, right? When they first, the first episode is 12, when they were both 12 years old. And then 12 years later, they reconnected through Facebook. And now another 12 years passed. Arthur and Nora married and living in New York. Here, so no longer with his girlfriend, still did not married, goes to meet Nora in New York. Arthur wonders if he is the roadblock in their own imperfect love story, admitting to Nora that he harbored the suspicions that Nora married him to secure a green card for US residency. Nora affirms that she loves Arthur, so the two had a little bit of frictions here, right? So the following night, the three go out to dinner. Initially, Nora translated each dialogue between, but eventually speaks with her exclusively in Korean. So he wonders what they were to each other in their past lives and what would have happened if she had never left South Korea and they stayed together. When Nora goes to the bathroom here, apologized to Arthur for speaking alone with Nora, but Arthur says he is glad to have met him. So they return to Arthur and Nora's apartment. Here invites them to visit him in South Korea, and they're ready to say goodbye. Nora accompanied her when they were waiting for the Uber to come, and the two exchanged long, meaningful looks at each other. Show really, very complicated love until the Uber arrives. Here wonders whether they were at that moment experiencing a past life, and asks Nora what their relationship will be in their next life, right? So in East Asian culture, we have this like Buddhist kind of belief in karma, right? So we have many round of X life and many around of next life, so on and so forth. So Nora so here wonders whether they were at that moment experiencing a past life and asks Nora what their relationship will be in their next life. So she says she does not know. Right. So here says, yes, right. So here answers, I will see you then. Then means the next life, right? So he leaves in the car and she walks back to her apartment, crying in Arthur's arms. Okay, so that's a story. Then, what a sad romantic love story. Here comes from afar, wanting to get his old love back for his current life. Nora obviously still loves her. You can see it from the film, but ultimately decides stay with Arthur. That is to stay with her current life, right? That she has chosen. Then, you ask why, why is this choice? Probably because love is only part of one's life, not the entire life. Nora wants to lead a life of an author, to devote herself to writing. And the author is a good companion in this. They both were writers. And on the other side, Nora is clear. The life she will live if she goes back to Korea with her. A life of a loving wife to her husband and a loving mother to her children. So Nora chooses the life of a writer. So that's the first story. And then I'm moving on to the second story. So here's the second story. It's a Chinese movie, as you can see, from the 20th century, the mid 20th century. The movie was made actually in 1949, right, before the communists take over, right. So and after the war, Sino-Japanese War, right. So you can see altogether the movie has only 5 characters. So both movie really did not have a lot of uh, uh, people in it, so very concise in a way. So this movie you can see from the from this advertisement. You can see all these 5 figures here, right? So this is the let's start from here. So this is the female protagonist, Yu Wen, and this is Yu Wen's husband, Li Yan, and this is the sister of Yu Wen's husband, right? And here in the background, it's the old servant Lao Huang, and here this one is the intruder, Dr. Zhi Chen from Shanghai. So this family lived in, this is the background of this family compound in the countryside, not far away from Shanghai. Right? So the story is entirely shot in this countryside, right? So what's the story, right? So the 5 only 5 characters, right? So these 5 characters. So the film takes place in a ruined family compound, right? You can see this is the kind of ruined family compound wall, right? And in a small town near Shanghai after the Sino-Japanese War. And it tells the story of the once prosperous Dai family. So this is the husband's family compound, family housing, right? So the Dai family. The film opens with Yuan, right? Yuan's the wife, okay, walking along the ruins of the city wall. So we don't see the city wall here, but this ruined walls is kind of very symbolic in this movie. This family compound wall was damaged, and also there was a city wall outside also damaged. Right, so all these ruins were kind of symbolic, narrating the slow-paced, the circular nature of Yuan's life in this environment. Her husband, Li Yan, is ill and marrows in the miserable reality of his family's loss, right? So the family is in a decline, and this decline was accelerated by the Japanese bombing during the wartime. So due to his illness and depression, his marriage to Yuan has long been loveless, though both remain dutiful spouses to each other. Li Yan spends his days in the courtyard expressing nostalgia for a better time. Meanwhile, Li Yan's young teenage sister, Xiu, right? So this is a sister Xiu, was too young to remember the past, stays cheerful and playful in the ruins of their home. Lao Huang, right? So Lao Huang is a faithful servant who remains at the home. So the Dai family still manages to live in an uneventful peace, but this is suddenly challenged by an unexpected visit from Li Yan's childhood friend, Zhi Chen, right? So this Zhi Chen, a doctor from Shanghai, who previously had a relationship with Yuan. So they were like previously lovers, but for some reason, also due to the war, they were not able to marry each other. So Yuan is conflicted between her love for Zhi Chen, for the doctor, and her loyalty to her husband. During Zhi Chen's visit, right? So Li Yan and Zhi Chen, right? So Li Yan's husband, and Zhi Chen, the visiting doctor, talk later in the day, and Li Yan expresses love for his wife, but feels unworthy of her. Li Yan suggests, so Li Yan feels guilty in a way, right? So the husband Li Yan feels guilty. Li Yan suggests that things would be better if Yuan marries Zhi Chen, making Zhi Chen feel guilty. And then one night, all these people get together to celebrate the Mid Moon Festival. Li Yan noticed happiness in Yuan that he has not seen in a while, but it's only because of her interaction with Zhi Chen, the doctor. In a conversation with Yuan shortly after, Li Yan expresses his shame for being an inadequate husband, and he wishes out loudly that Yuan had married Zhi Chen instead. As Yuan and Zhi Chen struggle between overcoming or succumbing to their passion for each other, Li Yan attempts suicide by taking an overdose of sleeping pills. Old Huang finds Li Yan passed out on his bed and gathers everyone else. And Li Yan was rescued, survived. But the attempted suicide convinces Zhi Chen, the doctor, to leave, and Yuan to stay in the relationship with her husband. So in the final sequence of the film, Xiu, the sister, and old Huang walk Zhi Chen to the train station, while Yuan is on the wall, the city wall, with Li Yan, and points into the horizon. So, thinking about this, metaphor of these ruined walls, right? So indicating some kind of hopeless or very pessimistic life in this ruined compound of the Dai family. So, like the ending of the past lives, the female protagonist does not leave for her love, right? So both choose to stay. Yuan chooses to stay in the ruins of the deserted countryside with her husband, while Zhi Chen takes off to the new world of hope and prosperity. Right, Shanghai. Shanghai is another very important metaphor in this film, representing hope, representing modernity, representing prosperity, so on and so forth. Right. So, what then shall we make of Yuan's choice? Why does she give up love and a good life in Shanghai with Zhi Chen? For what? For her wifely duty. Seems like the director of the film seems like directing us to think in this way, right? So for her wifely duty to her husband, well, this wifely duty to her husband actually reflecting a core value of traditional Confucian ethics, right? So for Confucianism, patriarchal and patrilineal family is the foundation of society, and a strict moral code is necessary for the maintenance of this hierarchical order. The Confucian moral code, put simply, is the so-called three principles. The ruler is the principle of the subject. Father is the son's principle, and husband is the principle of the wife. Then, when the subjects shall be loyal to the ruler, the son shall be filial to the father, and the wife shall be chaste to her husband. So that's old Confucian moral, right? So in the 20th century, new ideology of gender equality and women's liberation began to change China, started from the urban centers such as Shanghai. But the traditional way of life and the traditional gender norms lingered on. Women like Yuan got caught in between. Thus, we see in traditional Chinese society, among love, life, and the family obligation, the family carried the most weight in people's life, especially in women's life. To sum it up, in a rather simplistic way, Nora, the protagonist in past lives, makes her decision based on individual preference, while Yuan, right? This wife in the Chinese film, Yuan made her decision on based mainly on family obligation. Well, I guess my question is, what choice will you make if you were in their shoes, and why? I just end here, and we can come back to have a further discussion later.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Jiang. It's very interesting. These are two very interesting storylines, I guess. And yeah, we truly thank you for your presentation. And indeed, the question you propose is very provocative food of thought for all of us. Just like Professor Borovoy's earlier quote, how true true feminism can only be achieved with the feminization of men. It's been echoing in my brain since, and I couldn't stop thinking about it personally. I don't know about everyone else, but yeah. Well, last but not least for this panel, we welcome Mrs. Jessica Gu, a 26-year-old Chinese American soprano singer from Alexandria, Virginia, who is an accomplished opera singer with a bachelor's degree in voice performance from the Eastman School of Music and a master's in voice from Indiana University's Jacobs School of Music. Now, Mrs. Gu has performed notable roles such as I don't know the pronunciation of this, so please forgive me if I butcher this. Eurydice in Orfeo, and Eurydice, La Fée in Cendrillon, and Zerlina in Don Giovanni. Jessica made her professional debut with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra in 2023 and has received several accolades, including the Maryland Lyric Opera Prize. Fluent in Mandarin, she performs in the US and internationally, aiming to bridge cultural gaps through her diverse vocal repertoire. Now let's welcome Mrs. Gu.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here today and to share a little bit of music of the two cultures, Western and Eastern music, of Chinese music. So I will share my screen. Perfect. So we have here is a presentation on Western Chinese music and how they differ from each other and the crossover of the two throughout history. Let me actually make sure that one second. Quick share sound, just so I can have the videos able to play later. Okay. So a couple of key differences between Western Chinese music are the musical foundation, which is the musical theory behind the music. It is the notation, it is the scales in which the music is built from. that are vastly different, giving a Western music a Western sound and Chinese music a Chinese Oriental sound. Instruments are very vastly different as well, and music forms. And music forms are basically categories of music in the two cultures and how they're lumped together. So we'll first talk about musical scales and tuning systems. For Western music, it is the scale that we are all so familiar with, that 8-tone scale, that do re mi from Sound of Music, that song. It is the 8-tone scale that is the foundation of all music of Western, and it is very standardized. So it's been standardized for a couple hundred years before us. It started in Europe many, many, many years ago. And it was standardized with very strict rules and ways to compose. And this was because they really emphasized written music at the time, that they wanted to put a system together that allowed music to be preserved over long periods of time. And that is the case because we have music from all the way from the 1700s that we play to this day. And we still have even the composer's notes and very specific intentions that they have for the music. For Chinese music, we have the 5-tone scale. It's the pentatonic scale, and that consists of 5 notes in the entire scale. So that's do, re, mi, so, la. And those 5 notes can be rearranged, organized in however way possible, and still be harmonious and very melodious to the ear. So it won't give off any dissonant sounds. You can try this out on a piano if you do have one at home. Trying out all the black keys in a piano, and no matter how you arrange those black keys, playing from different versions, you are still able to create a piece of music that sounds very beautiful and harmonious to the ears. So this gives way to that improvisational feel of Chinese music, as it is so fluid in the way that music is produced. And this is possibly because they really preserved that oral tradition throughout history. A lot of folk music, a lot of music in Chinese history was passed down through orally, generations to generations. So we have our usual Western instruments that we're very familiar with. We have the piano, the violin, string instruments, the brass instruments, and also the woodwinds on the left side. And these are consisted inside orchestras, and we see them very often and play them. For Chinese instruments, these instruments are more for the folk music. We have the guzheng, we have the pipa and the erhu, and they are learned a lot through orally. So they will play, the master will play, and the student will figure it out orally by themselves how to play the feeling that they have to play with. So the aesthetic of these two cultures are very different as well. The Western, we have very precise, and that is due to that intense standardization of the written music. So we have everything super precise, a lot of rhythm, a lot of momentum, and we can hear that in this piece that we'll be listening to right now. And that is Beethoven Symphony No. 5. I'm sure that it might be very familiar to you all. So as you can see here, the conductor is incredibly vital to the orchestra because of that precision that we were talking about. That weeks leading up to the performance, the conductor will be there to make sure that the music comes to life. But along with that, the most important factor is that the composer's intentions that they infused into the music is able to come to life in that entire ensemble. And that conductor being there on the day of the performance, making sure that everything is incredibly precisely together and fully as a unit. So for Chinese music, it is a lot more atmospheric, and they use a lot of nature sounds in their music, and it's a lot more calming and um, folk music. It's very beautiful. So we have the guqing, which is a similar version to the guzheng but smaller and less strings. And this song is supposed to emulate the effect of flowing water.
Summertime stroll? That's an protect your.
And then we have the ensemble here of Chinese instruments. And you can see here on the left side, we have the guqing, which is smaller, and on the right side, we have the guzheng. So, a couple of musical forms that we'll be diving into today. On the Western side, we have the sonata. And the sonata is basically a formula, a template for composers to compose for piano or for symphonies or for instrumental music. And sonatas are actually, we learned this as an opera singer. We learn it in undergrad and master's during our music theory classes. And we have to learn how to write a sonata. And these sonatas are so incredibly mathematical and precise to the point where they will tell you exactly when to change keys, exactly where to change to, like which key to change to, and the symmetricity, the symmetrical aspect of music, and how each phrase should be perfectly symmetrical. So sonata is basically a form that a lot of music stems from, as composers has this basic template to lay on their own music and their own imagination. Western music also has a symphony, which is basically pieces for orchestras, and they have opera. And opera are basically a theatrical piece. It's a play, but instead of using the voice as speaking, we use our voice singing throughout the entire 3 hours of the opera. And we have to learn how to use our bodies in a way that we don't need a microphone, and we are able to produce our sound and resonate our sound to the point where our voice is able to carry over an entire orchestra and fill up the entire opera theater. Chinese music has a couple of forms. The first form that we'll dive into is folk songs. And folk songs are so incredibly important to Chinese culture and heritage, as it is the foundation of a lot of people's childhood. And folk songs are basically passed down through oral tradition, and it's very regional. It's very specific to regions. In China, I'm sure a lot of you do know that there are a lot of dialects in China, and these dialects are not similar to America's accents, like the Southern drawl or the Boston accents. They're dialects to the point where a neighboring region might have no idea when they're speaking in their dialect. It's almost a different language, how different the dialects are region to region. And this is similar for food as well. We have a lot of different regions have very particular tastes to their food. It almost seems like a different country because the food taste profile is so different. Like, for example, in Shanghai, we have lots of sweetness to our food, whereas in Sichuan, it's a lot of numbing spice and spicy foods. So folk songs are similar in that way, in that all the regions are very particular and they are sung in the dialect of the region. And in Shanghai and Suzhou, we have this folk song genre called the pingtan, which actually includes a pipa and an erhu. The female plays the pipa and the erhu is played by a male. And they do dialogue between each other using the Suzhou dialect. And they speak of stories, of tales of ancient history, or even just made up tales. And my parents' generation loved this music because they hear it when they were growing up and they can recite it and sing it to this day as they are singing along to it. And so one of the most important folk songs that we have to mention is the Mo Li Hua song, which is the jasmine flower song. It is one of the most famous folk songs of China. It is almost jokingly considered as the second national anthem of China. It was created in the Qing Dynasty, 18th century, and it was internationally famous because it was used in many different music from other cultures. So we'll first listen to the song. And this singer is a folk song singer. Her name is Song Zhuying, and she sings Mingzu Changfa, which is folk singing. And you'll hear that we don't really usually hear this type of singing in Western culture because her voice is trying to emulate a very bright sound, a very bird-like sound, but also very youthful. And this song was actually used on the international stage as early as 1926. And it was used by Giacomo Puccini, who is an Italian opera composer, and he adapted this song for the opera Turandot. And that was one of the first time Western listeners heard Chinese music. And this is the music in his opera. And so the other musical forms of Chinese music is instrumental music, as we've heard before, with different instruments, and also Peking opera. And that is a very big genre. And we will compare and contrast the two operas, Western and Chinese opera, next. So these two operas are vastly different, and the only thing in common is the word opera. For Western operas, powerful singing, as I mentioned before, that ability to resonate with our instruments so that we are able to cut through the orchestra and into the audience. but also lifelike acting. So our acting is very human-based. We just act normal as humans. Whereas Chinese opera, they are very, very, very stylized singing and movements and dance. So they move very, very symbolically, and they almost paint like a painting with their movements. Western opera, we use very simple makeup and costume because we are just adding and enhancing our regular features so that we can be seen from the first row to the back row. Whereas Chinese opera have extremely extravagant makeup and costume, as you can see in the picture here. And it's almost an art, the amount of work and hours they have to put in right before performances to put the makeup and costumes on. So for Western opera, there are many different character roles that a person can sing. Every single opera has a unique set of roles that a person can sing, but it is more gender rigid. So these roles are dependent on whether the person's voice type is the range is a certain type, or if there is a certain color to the voice, or a certain body shape, or a certain their innate ability determines what roles that they sing. Whereas Chinese operas, they have 4 fixed roles: the hero, the heroine, the painted face, and the comic. And the gender is much more fluid. So the hero can be a woman in male makeup, where a heroine can also be a male in female makeup, singing in feminine tessitura, which is register. But one of the most important differences is the vocal technique. For Western opera, we try to make sure that our vocal technique is smooth, is natural, and clear, while still being able to have that resonant frequency in our voice to cut. But in Chinese opera, it is very crooning and very violin-like. It's a very unique color to their singing. So we'll first hear the clear and smooth technique of the Western opera. And this is an Italian opera called Elixir of Love, and you can see that it's a comic opera, so you'll see that there is some humor and natural fun.
Finora amor non sente e tra la 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 vuol far l'indifferente.
And then we will look into the crooning violin-like vocal technique of Chinese opera. So next we'll talk about the fusion of Eastern and Western music together. And we have to talk about Tan Duan, who is a international Chinese composer and conductor at the forefront of that fusion today. He has composed the film score of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the movie, and won Academy Award for that. He is very, very famous right now and still composing and fusing these two cultures today. A significant work that he's done is the Ghost Opera, premiering in 1994. He fuses these two cultures by having a lot of drawing in from a lot of different influences. The Western influence is the instruments. He has a quartet, so two violins, a viola, and a cello in for the work, and then he also draws on a lot of motifs of Bach and Shakespeare. The Chinese influence, he has the pipa, which is the instrument of the traditional instrument of China, and also Buddhist monk chanting, traditional Chinese folk songs as well. So we'll take a listen to this. So as you can hear that he actually has the quartet playing some Chinese music, and he purposefully writes their parts a lot of glissandos, a lot of sliding note to note, giving it that very erhu feeling that a traditional Chinese instrument can make. And so, in wrapping up, we see that Chinese and Western music each hold unique cultural treasures. Preserving these musical forms helps us honor and appreciate and sustain our heritage. The fusion of these traditions, especially through artists like Tan Duan, creates a powerful dialogue that bridges cultures and drives innovation. This blend of East and West shows how music can transcend boundaries and foster understanding. Let's celebrate and support this cultural exchange, ensuring that the beauty and wisdom of both traditions continue to inspire future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gu. I love the music personally. It was fascinating, especially to hear about hear the Chinese song "茉莉花" being adapted into Italian. It's really a great exemplification of, I guess, the theme: social frictions, clashes between cultures, and mixes in between both. And yeah, because we're running a little short on time, it's very unfortunate that we can only sustain time for one question. For the Q&A of this panel, but I received a really great question for Mrs. Borovoy. I'm sorry for the other questions that were submitted, but we simply do not have time for this panel. I'm sorry, but yeah, I know we're all really excited to continue discussion on this. So I adapted this question a little bit. The person asks, I'm fascinated by the notion of some Japanese households once raising women for participation in war. Conventionally, war has been attributed to a much masculine sphere, which was characterized by, I guess, the quality of dominance and staying on the offense. And the person who asked the question basically wonders whether Japan's case of encouraging women to participate in war reflects a contradictory dynamic against the patriarchic stereotype present in many other societies. And adding my personal twist to it, it's also a surprising thing to see, I guess, in Japan, considering I know Professor Borovoy's book of The Too Good Wife talks about women in households having to attend to certain problems with alcoholism that men might have, and it reflects a different a kind of status the women had in modern Japan and the struggles they faced. It's kind of, I feel like these are two very different dynamics. So I wonder what comments Professor Borovoy has on this.
Thank you very much for the question. Just briefly, yeah, I think that's a wonderful observation that it does kind of upset some of these dichotomies that we have, the association of war simply with masculinity. I think it also upsets our notions about femininity and gender and domesticity, which is that those constructs are limited to sort of inward facing, directly kind of family oriented matters as opposed to nation politics, um, modernity, violence, aggression, etc. So I think in a really interesting way, it kind of changes the way we might think about the course of women's history. And I guess I would just add that I've taken so much away too from the other speakers tonight, Professor Jang and also Jessica Gu, in thinking about the way in which we might kind of turn these dynamics on their heads a little bit and really think creatively about what we mean by categories of modernity and tradition and Confucianism and the family and so forth, and also think about some of these really important kind of sort of comparisons in the arts between kind of Western notions of beauty, music, precision, etc., and Chinese notions of sort of the atmosphere and a much more kind of symbolic kind of approach to the arts. So I want to say that I've learned a lot from the other speakers tonight as well.
Thank you, Professor Borovoy, on the comment. Yeah, I also very appreciate everyone who spoke on this panel. And yeah, specifically, I also think that it's stereotyping is so inadequate in representing what a group of people stand for. And I've read a little bit of Khan's work today. She's also a feminist writer, I guess. And yeah, she talks about how stereotypes and labels are assigned through power structures and social structures, but it doesn't have to be because they simply constrain. But humans and their identity could naturally stand in many places along a spectrum rather than at two polar opposites ends or points. And that's what really frees up a society, I guess. And I guess it's also reflected in women taking up what occupations that are traditionally considered masculine, like participation in war, I guess. So yeah, we're seeing this very interesting dynamic and social friction right here. And thank you so much again, Mrs. Gu, Professor Borovoy, Professor Jiang. And we will now move on to the penultimate section of our summit this year. So I see that Mrs. Jai has also joined us. And now, having concluded our 3 panels of scholarly discussion on the themes of East Asia's ascent, weaving the webs, and social frictions, I'm really thrilled to invite Mrs. Jai to discuss her research on Buddhism as a transregional phenomenon that brought the distant world to East Asia. Now, this is Mrs. Jai's talk will serve as the closing speech for the scholarly discussions because I feel like it's an all-encapsulating topic about weaving connections or webs between East Asian and South Asian societies, as we have seen yesterday with our panel Weaving the Webs, but also about the convergence and frictions of these societies, as we have seen today with social frictions, and the ascent of such stunning patterns of cultural diffusion on the links connecting the East and West, namely the Silk Road, which we have also seen yesterday with the panel The Ascent. And now I can confidently say that Mrs. Jai will make a capstone presentation that completes the EAYS 2024's panels of scholarly discourse. So according to the Fairbanks Center of Chinese Studies, Mrs. Jai is a PhD candidate in the South Asian Studies Department at Harvard University. Her research seeks to understand the important role that Tibetan Buddhism played in the cultural communication between various Asian regions and cultures. And Mrs. Jai's dissertation project, Protected, a study in the Mahakala traditions in Asia. Again, I apologize if my pronunciation is not exact. Her project will study one of the most important esoteric Buddhist protective deities in South, Inner, and East Asian history, Mahakala. She will use the Buddhist protective deity as a carrier to examine the role of Tibetan esoteric Buddhism in the political and cultural life of China from the 13th to early 17th century. Now, in addition, her work will survey how an Indian theology was adopted and indigenized by Tibetan ecclesiastical and elite circles. And with that, I yield to Mrs. Chai.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for your amazing introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, screen sharing, continue. Let's do that. Okay. Great. Can you see it? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you very much. I really appreciate our amazing organizers. It's just amazing young scholars like you guys to put up something like this, a platform for us to get together and share our research and ideas. I do see a lot of confidence and a very positive future of the field in the future. So yeah, so as Jeffrey kindly introduced, my name is Yinyao Zhai. I'm currently a PhD candidate in the South Asian Studies Department at Harvard University, and my research focuses on tantric or esoteric. Oh, sorry, is it a? Okay. Tantric or esoteric Buddhism, the transmission of it from India subcontinent to Tibet, and subsequently from Tibet to Inner Asia and China. So today, based on my background and expertise, I'm going to talk about the topic, bringing the distant world to China, weaving the Buddhist networks across Asia. So I will discuss how Buddhism brought the distant world to the conservative traditional Chinese society in pre-modern times. Okay, so I believe many of you have heard of the term three religions of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. In China, this is how it is expressed in Chinese. It conveys the idea that these three religions are considered major religions in China. And also, you might have quickly realized that Buddhism is the only foreign religion here among the three. Not only that, but Buddhism, the only foreign religion, is listed as a parallel to the two indigenous Chinese belief systems. And it's fair to say that besides those who claim an affirmative belief system, many, if not most Chinese nowadays, have a dual identity of both atheists and believers in the amalgamation of the three belief systems of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. So to respond to today's theme, I will leave aside Buddhism's more theological aspects and focus on Buddhism as a trans-regional, trans-temporal phenomenon that brought the distant world to China from its neighboring regions. So in the modern world, we often emphasize communication, right? Because it encourages mutual understanding and innovation. And it's really amazing to think that this cultural, transcultural, and geographical communication already took place in the Buddhist world about 2,000 years ago. So today, due to the time constraints, I will only focus on two aspects. So the first is how Buddhism brought a distant language and art to China. And the other one is how it brought an alternative sensibility to the Chinese people. And of course, as you know, Buddhism or Buddhist studies are a very encompassing topic and field. And it's almost impossible to encapsulate anything about Buddhism within 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A session of the Q&A session and elaborate on the topic that I cover in my talk. So just a very brief history. So Buddhism was founded as a religious sect by Shakyamuni Buddha around 2,500 years ago. Of course, there have been a lot of academic scholarly disputes regarding the precise dates of the historical Buddha, but here I'm just saying 2,500 years for convention's sake. And around the turning of the Common Era, Buddhism was brought to China mostly by Central Asian monks. You're right, not Indians, but mostly Central Asians, such as Parthians, Sogdians, and the Yuezhi people. We have a very popular legend saying that it was the Emperor Ming of the Han Dynasty had a famous dream of the Golden Man, that's starting the dissemination of Buddhism in China. A beautiful dream and story, but not likely to be true. However, what is certain is that Buddhist missionaries must have been active at the beginning of the turning of the Common Era. So the first Chinese translation of Buddhist scriptures is reported to have been translated in 149 CE. And these large-scale translation activities continued for about 1,000 years until the last official translation forum was shut down during the Northern Song Dynasty. However, individual translation activities never ceased, and I would say they're still continuing today. So for China, at least, Buddhism came in the form of writings. These Buddhist scriptures were written in the Indic language. Contrary to many people's understanding today, the first Buddhist scriptures brought to China weren't written in Sanskrit, but more likely in a vernacular form of Sanskrit known as Prakrit. But later, around the 5th century, it's true that China started receiving more scriptures written in Sanskrit. No matter what, I would say the translation project of Buddhist scriptures between Indian and Chinese languages is one of the greatest intellectual undertakings ever in the history of human civilization. This is because these two languages, Chinese or classical Chinese and Indian language, are fundamentally different, very different, that they function in ways that almost contradict one another. But the vehement clash between the Indic language and Chinese yielded a revolution and innovation in the Chinese language in the form of the so-called Buddhist Chinese as a counterpart of classical Chinese. So many words have been integrated so well into our language today, and they are indeed very beautifully translated. And here I have some examples for you. So, for example, those early translators used uncommon characters to provide a phonetic transliteration of the Indic word, such as this word "pusa" for bodhisattva. And rarely we have a creation of new characters, such as the character for Buddha, for, right? And more commonly, we have those introductions of new words and phrases of those idiomatic expressions, such as 五体投地、刹那体悟灌顶, which are a part of everyday Chinese language nowadays, but they are actually from Buddhist translations, and they are indeed very beautiful translations. Because I work with translations mostly, and whenever I do my translations, and I struggle with those terminologies, it just always amazes me how our predecessors could come up with such beautiful expressions. So I would say to any young scholars interested in, I would say, languages, linguistics, cultural communication, or literature, that Buddhism is a treasure that awaits discovery for sure. However, as we all know, literacy in pre-modern world was usually very low, so written scriptures alone wouldn't have been sufficient to facilitate the propagation of Buddhism. So art became a very crucial medium for spreading the religion. As Buddhism spread from India through Central Asia into East Asia, it brought with it not only texts and teachings, but also a rich tradition of artistic expression that significantly impacted our local art forms. Buddhism's influence on East Asian art is profound and enduring, shaping the aesthetic and cultural landscapes of the countries such as China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. For example, I'm very sure many of you must have visited a Buddhist temple at a certain point in your life, where you could see those beautiful murals and sculptures, just like those I provided here. So Buddhist murals and paintings played a vital role in spreading Buddhist teachings and aesthetics. Temples and monasteries were adorned with vibrant frescoes and paintings depicting scenes from the life of the Buddha. There's a terminology of it called the Jataka stories, right? And later in the Tantric Buddhism, you have those protective deities and the mandalas, for example. And these artworks not only serve as a visual aid for practitioners, but also demonstrate the fusion of indigenous artistic styles with Buddhist themes, creating unique regional variations. For example, the Dunhuang cave paintings, which these two pictures come from, showcase a blend of Indian, Central Asian, Inner Asian, and local Chinese artistic elements, illustrating the dynamic cultural exchanges along the Silk Road. And one of the most significant contributions of Buddhism to East Asian art is the introduction of religious iconography. Buddhist sculptures, paintings, and architectural designs became prevalent, featuring depictions of the Buddha or Buddhas in later traditions, right, and bodhisattvas and many various deities. These works often emphasize serene and meditative qualities, aiming to inspire spiritual contemplation and convey the teachings of Buddhism. But here, I would like to highlight one aspect of how Buddhist aesthetics and art influence traditional Chinese perception. So the Buddhist depiction of the Buddha and the bodhisattvas represents the concept of a perfect or perfected human. Essentially, their iconography is a human form, as we could see from the image on the left. It's an image of bodhisattva from Dunhuang. But this depiction of the Buddha and the bodhisattvas later influenced a fortune-telling technique known as the physiognomy, meaning that one could discern others' personality and even fate by merely observing their facial features. And in terms of what perfect facial features should look like on the right, as you could see from the screen, and if you like to explore the literature and compare it to the Buddhist iconography, you will find out that the Chinese physiognomy perceives the face of the Buddha as embodying the ideal facial features. So some of these facial features have been strongly influenced by Central Asian and even Greek art. I would say Buddhist art is an extremely interesting field for study and exploration. However, due to my own limitations, because I've been trained primarily as a text scholar, and I really don't know much about art. So here I only discuss this very brief aspect here. Nonetheless, I do hope this will inspire you, some of you, to continue exploring this very fascinating field. Okay, so once the language barrier is more or less mitigated, it's time to exchange ideas. Buddhism, rooted in Indian culture and ideologies and greatly shaped by the social, historical media in which it was born and developed, certainly brought with it some drastically different ideas to China that the Chinese didn't always like and welcome. I would never say that Buddhism changed the sensibility of the Chinese in the way that it did, for example, in the southeastern countries and the regions such as Tibet. But it definitely exerted a great influence on it, especially in how the Chinese perceive and approach the other world and supernatural powers, as it transformed the other world from a realm of obscurity and hidden violence to a place of potential human agency. So for a very long time, personally, it has fascinated me how Chinese approach and perceive religion or supernatural powers. On the one hand, we seem to be indifferent and rejected, right? But on the other hand, we can be very superstitious, believing in things like feng shui, the burial site, producing male heirs, and the zodiac signs. I'm very sure you've heard sentences like, oh, horse people don't get along with, for example, tiger people. And you might have read it on news nowadays that many well-educated young people are becoming fortune tellers, right? Of course, I don't think I understand traditional Chinese thought enough to make a very definitive conclusion, but I have been drawn to the sacrificial rituals of the Shang dynasty, which I think provided me with some insights. It seems to me that Shang people lived in a world of obscurity, full of bloodthirsty and never propitiated spirits of ancestors. And those ancestors required the sacrifice of animals and humans in large numbers to treat living beings with a temporary favor. This was, of course, very brutal and must have traumatized generations of people. Thus, starting from the Zhou dynasty, this memory was completely obliterated by the ritualists and historians. Many of you may be familiar with Confucius' attitudes towards the supernatural powers, right? There are two phrases I got from the Analects. So it's like the Confucius says, oh, I respect them, but I don't want to engage with them. So these two phrases are usually used as an evidence of how traditional Chinese ideology is centered on humanity. But they really gave me a taste of avoidance out of fright. For example, imagine you say, oh, I respect this person, I respect these people or my family, but I don't want to talk about them. It just doesn't sound right. So especially given the background that we just talked about. But we all know that fears don't just go away just because we close our eyes, right? They linger and only grow stronger with our avoidance. So I think that's why we're still pretty much occupied with death and otherworld and supernatural powers nowadays. I can still recall my relatives performing, like carrying out those rituals when I had fever as a children, and we are pretty much occupied with burial site, right, and posthumous offerings even nowadays. So Buddhism came to China with a new approach to death and supernatural powers. Although Buddhism is a religion with a central figure of worship known as the Buddha, I would say Buddhism is very humanistic and emphasizes human agency. Um, even though Buddhist pantheon is replete with supernatural beings, the core of the worship we have Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and there are many deities. But Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are once human with no exception. No one was born divine, right? They had to work really hard to achieve their enlightenment. So the fundamental idea here is not to worship these supernatural powers to beg for their favor or mercy, but rather they're here to show the full potential of human beings and human potential. So everyone has the potential to attain enlightenment and liberation just as they did. Everyone, I'm sorry. So whenever we, like, for example, whenever we prostrate in front of an image of the Buddha or Bodhisattva, it's not the superpower per se that we are prostrating to, but rather we're prostrating to our own potential as human beings. Of course, here I'm only talking about the fundamental but rather ideal Buddhist ideology, and I'm not suggesting this is what is actually practiced by people, because I'm sure when we read on the news that a super rich man spent, I don't know, $10,000 on incense on the first day of the Lunar New Year at a Buddhist temple. I'm sure you've read it or seen it somewhere. I'm sure when they do that, the transcendent potential of humanity is not likely what they ask for and what they have in their mind, right? Um, However, with the introduction of Buddhism, another form of supernatural world was also introduced to the Chinese people. It's a world of benevolent beings, benevolent supernatural beings that don't require blood sacrifice, and they don't hinder our human life out of dissatisfaction. Also, this belief system fully acknowledges the limitation of humans, but encourages our transcendence. So in this way, Buddhism not only brought the distant cultural and material world to China in the form of languages, literature, and art, but also a distant spiritual world that was in favor of living beings. But personally, I think, and I believe it not everyone agreed with me, that Buddhism never succeeded in this aspect. I think Buddhism failed to change the sensibility of Chinese like it did in other regions. Nonetheless, it indeed exerted influence and provided an option for those who were interested in alternatives. So in conclusion, so Buddhism's journey to China is a profound example of cultural and spiritual exchange that transcends time and geography. It introduced new ideas, languages, art form, and facilitated the interaction between China and its neighboring regions and enriched the Chinese culture by providing alternative perspectives on the supernatural and human potential. While it may not have completely transformed the Chinese sensibility as it didn't have to, its influence is undeniable. And for younger scholars just like yourselves, I think Buddhism offers a treasure trove of knowledge and insight into the complexities of cultural communication and human experience. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this discussion has inspired you to explore the rich intersections of Buddhism and East Asia even further. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chai. It's really interesting to consider how Buddhism, a religion of South Asian origin, really flourished in East Asia rather than, say, South Asia, because the centers uh, of population that practice Buddhism the most are East Asia and Southeast Asia in the modern day. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really interesting to see this dynamic of a religion not flourishing the most in its native land and going somewhere else. And it has been a result of thousands of years of, I guess, cultural diffusion and evolution, and that's really interesting to see. And so yeah, so over the past 2 days, we have heard from an amazing range of panelists speak on different aspects of East Asian studies, and I guess that's one of the grand purposes of our summit here is to present all of these different topics, all of these different approaches, research methods, and research results that collectively make up this field of East Asian studies. And we have had speakers who are esteemed university professors, musicians over the past 2 days. We also have educators and political activists. So it's representing a wide spectrum of professions, and that's one of the things we strive to achieve in East Asian studies. And now we having heard from all these adults, let's hear from some students. And so with that, I hand this microphone over to Christina, who is offline with the students, about to do some presentations on student projects. So let's welcome them to the stage.
Great, and welcome to this year DIY at Summit. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, united by active communication, creativity, and the transformative power of writing. Today, I have the state honor of presenting the free international project for a wide array of children. Each of these projects not only identifies excellence, but also brings forward unique perspectives and groundbreaking approaches to these. Our first presenter today is Nicole Tango, going to compel a journey into the world of bilingual education. Her project focuses on the East Minority School in Sichuan, China, and explores the challenges and opportunities of bilingual education in a culturally rich region. Following Day will hear from Kiki, who will address the deeply relevant topics, reclaiming the diaspora voice. Her project delves into the experiences of Chinese Christians in liminal spaces, exploring how these individuals navigate their identities and contribute to the broader national community. Our final speaker, Eleanor Lennon, will present her research on how social conditions influence modern medicine from a Chinese perspective. Eleanor's work examines the profound impact of cultural traditions on contemporary medical practice, highlighting the rich insights of heritage and related to the As we proceed with these presentations, we encourage everyone to engage actively because we'll be giving out prizes to members of the audience who have questions or any comments to say about the presentation. And remember, stay with us until the end for a chance to win a $50 of gift card, which will be given to those out there. Thank you for all being here today and for your commitment to exploring incredible ideas. So without further ado, let's welcome our first presenter, Day.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Jamie, and I'm a currently rising senior in St. Mark's School in Massachusetts, and I'm from Pinghu, China. This is a place which is really near this biggest place where the Yi people reside. So today I'm going to talk about the bilingual education in Yi minority school. So first, a little bit of background information on the Yi people. So they are an ethnic group in southern China, and they're like the 7th largest of the 55 ethnic minority groups recognized by the Chinese government. And then they primarily live in areas of like Sichuan, which is where I live, Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi, usually in really mountainous regions, like in the mountains. And this Liangshan Yi Autonomous Prefecture is the home to the largest population of Yi China. And then this is where, this is like near Sichuan, which is where I live. So today I'm really closely going to talk about the E language. Um, wait, okay. Oh, actually, let's talk about a little bit about their culture first. So this is a patrilineal society, which means that it's really heavy on men because men were generally considered superior to women, and men practice polygamy, and women are usually excluded from this society less. And then, so will E women lag behind education than E men. So which means that very few EU women become educational instructors or political leaders. And this is also because of its patrilineality. It's a son father patronymic naming system. And this is also a kind of traditional society as they have caste systems similar to like Indian. And the most superior caste is the black E, and then they only are 7% of the whole E population. And then it's white E, and then it's called Aja and Xiangxi. So the more superior caste often own a lot of slaves of the lower caste, and which caste depends on your patrilineal descendant. And as I said, the slave system is really prominent. And this other really interesting culture thing they have is the Torch Festival. So during this Torch Festival, um, every people from their own household would get a torch and they would join this huge torch parade. And then after the torch parade, they would gather around at the bonfire party, as you can see on one of the pictures here. And then, so you can see there's some traditional costumes and some traditional uh, musical instruments here, and they have a really rich culture. And then on to the E language, which is what I'm mainly going to talk about today. They have a lot of E language, and many of which are mutually intelligible, which means that if you speak one branch of the language, you can mostly understand the other languages. And then the most widely accepted or recognized language is Norsu language, and it's also known as Northern Yi, Lanxiang Yi, and Sichuan Yi. And this is recognized by the Chinese government that this is the like standard language that Yi people use. And they also use this Yi script, as you can see kind of here after the Nosu in the parentheses. It is a really unique system of writing system, as it was originally logosyllabic like Chinese, but it only has like around 10,000 characters, and many of which are regional since the script has never been standardized across the E people. So a lot of works of history, literature, medicine, as well as like um, genealogies of the ruling families were written in Old E script, and some are but the new E script are like heavily influenced by Chinese. So I'm gonna move on to how Chinese, like the whole Mandarin Putonghua thing, influenced the E language, which is kind of sort of its own language. And so the language dynamic in China is really interesting. When the Chinese Communist Party came into power in 1950s, the language of Mandarin was widely used to support the policy of like um, the policy of the Communist Party. So a lot of Mandarin was promoted as the national language, and a lot of minority ethnic language, like the E language, were suppressed. So I want to share a little bit about a personal story of my, like an anecdote basically. So my grandma, she used to teach as a promoter for the Mandarin language to the E people. So she went there with the primary purpose of teaching the E people Mandarin. So that's like basically what the Communist Party or the Chinese government did, which they send a lot of young teachers to these minority ethnic group areas to promote Mandarin and basically like kind of try to say that their language doesn't matter while Mandarin is what matters. So that brings to us a lot of problems. And um, so as it slowly evolved before, it was all like promoting Mandarin and stuff, but now as the Chinese government start to slowly realize the importance of preserving the language, so the state has resumed the responsibility of reducing the educational gap between majority and minority groups. So they've been promoting this bilingual education. So there's some Chinese only schools which are seen of kind of prestigious, but there's also two models of bilingual schools. So first model school use the E language as a medium of instruction, which they teach everything in E language except the Chinese language course. And the second model school is which it uses Chinese as the medium of instructions except the E language course. So as you can see, there's a lot of different schools, and this brings a lot of problems as a lot of people were seeing this bilingual education as problematic. So, although bilingual schools have been around for 40 years, they're not really popular among E people because that young people, as they're still in this Chinese majority like society, so they eventually have to take the college entrance examination, which is called Gaokao, which uses Mandarin as the primary languages to enter the mainstream society. And so as a result, each language is not a practical language. So a lot of parents give priorities of sending their children to Chinese schools to have higher quality education instead of those bilingual schools. However, some parents also want their children to get systematic education on the E language to preserve the heritage because it is a lot of people said reflected that it is not enough to only learn the E language at home, which means they probably would not know well how to write the script because since it is such a unique writing system. So these are some challenges that the education has as the power dynamic in the Chinese society is really problematic. And also at the same time, I want to highlight that because of this power dynamic between Chinese and E people, um, excuse me, because of that, a lot of people learn to do a lot of code switching, which means that they would speak in one language and then move to the other, and the switch between these two languages are really, really prominent. So onto some solutions that I promoted through like my research that are thought really helpful. So first is creating a balanced curriculum. So what already exists wasn't enough, right? Because a lot of people, they have this problem of only learning one language while only learning the other language. So we want to develop a curriculum that equally emphasizes E and Mandarin language to ensure that students are proficient in both. And also we want a lot of community involvement, which means that we want a lot of native E people since they have a fairly large population. So we want to organize some community events to celebrate E culture and language. And also the current government and NGO support is not really prominent right now as there's only a few funding. So we thought it might be helpful that we seek support from government and non-governmental organization to fund and promote more bilingual education initiatives. And another idea is student support programs, which we hopefully can establish mentorship and support programs for each student so that they don't feel insecure about their own culture. And because a lot of people reflected that they speak Mandarin, not E language, because they feel that they will get discriminated and stuff because this is deemed as a not majority language, mainstream language. But to promote their cultural heritage and their confidence in their own language, we want to have the student support programs that offer counseling services to help students cope with like these social and academic challenges and also integrate cultural heritage projects into the curriculum. So they can know more about their cultural heritage. As I mentioned before, the Torch Festival, it is already really large right now, but we want more people to get involved in these really culturally significant events to help them to recognize their own cultural heritage and their own culture. Yeah, so that's all I have to talk about today. Thank you.
And next we'll hear from Kiki Hu, who will address a deeply relevant topic, which is reclaiming diasporic voices. Her project delves into the experiences of Chinese Christians in liminal spaces, exploring how these individuals navigate their identities and contribute to broader cultural conversations. Kiki's presentation will offer a thought-provoking perspective on the intersection of faith, identity, and diaspora. Let's welcome her.
My name is Kiki Hu, and I'm an incoming freshman at Swarthmore College. Today, I want to present the proposal of a digital humanities project, Reclaiming Diasporic Voices, Chinese Christians in Liminal Spaces. So from the name of this project, you will know that I want to focus on a group, and this group is really noticed and exists in research. That'll be Chinese Christians. So through this project, I hope to elevate the stories and memories of Chinese Christians from the Asbury Church and many underground house churches. And I hope this can bring more attention to understanding how Chinese Christians construct and reconstruct their identities through this transnational power of Christianity. So this is a picture of Chinese Catholics attending Ash Wednesday Mass at a state-sanctioned church in Beijing. And it hasn't been just recently that Christianity has become a dynamic part of China's religious landscape. Since the first Christian missionaries came to China in the late 16th and early 17th century, Christianity started to take root in this foreign land. With Christianity gaining support of many during the Qing dynasty due to its perceived egalitarianism, Christianity became a mobilizing political force. As China underwent tumultuous social and political changes, Christianity became a source of personal meaning and protection, offering the poor food, shelter, and education. So during this time, the church has become a transnational form of intimacy or belonging for the diasporic souls. However, coming to contemporary China, policies on religious practices have shifted. Places of worship and organizations were demolished, closed, or reappropriated, and religious practices have been state sanctioned. What it means by state sanctioned is that the authorities have the flexibility when determining which religious practices are consistent with the party's guidelines or which fall outside of the guidelines. So all aspects of religious life, including religious leadership appointments, selection of clergy, and interpretation of doctrines are all overseen, not to mention stories of these Chinese Christians. So in a word, the community of Chinese Christians was forged, made visible, and then rendered unseen. And also, all the churches we now can visit have lost their historicity. The story and the past by and of this vigilant form of minority are erased, and instead they're replaced by xenocentric and homogeneous discourse. Individuals with their stories behind them were reduced to faceless masses, voiceless and forgotten. So realizing what is missing, I want to act starting from here. Usually our studies of humanities are put into practice only through digital humanities. However, I want this project to carry out more influence and be more multimedia. So it will be a combination of archival plus digital humanities through interviews and field observation. I'll conduct in-depth interviews with members of Asbury Church and participants from underground house churches to gather personal narratives, experiences, and their family history. Basically to create an archive from their and only their voices, without an intentional framework to exclude personal voices. And also, I'll observe and document religious practices and community interactions within these churches to understand the lived experiences of the congregants. So one of my goals is to have a glimpse into how religious institutions, churches obviously in particular, um, function as part of what Louis Althusser termed ideological state apparatus. And these ISAs exercise hegemony by disseminating and reinforcing dominant ideologies through various institutions, including religious organizations. By examining the lived experience of Chinese Christians within these spaces and observing community interactions, we can better understand how these communities navigate, resist, and sometimes reinforce the prevailing sociopolitical structures. And ultimately, from this project, I hope to redirect people's attention to how narratives are formed and how intentional selection of what are included in archives shape history. And on a side note, this is also something brought up by Ms. Zhang in yesterday's conference, where she talked about also the transcultural interactions of people. So back to this, in selecting what to collect and preserve, the creators, subjects, formats, and contents of the past are redefined, all of which comprise processes that are not politically or culturally neutral. Only accepted historical narratives are recorded, recognized, and presented in our schools, the media, and the governmental establishments, and they decide what is normal and what is not. They're written in a way to justify the current social, political, and economic hegemonies and are supportive of those power at the cost of eliminating the stories of oppressed people and those engaged in struggles. And Chinese Christians are one of these people. They have been herded to state sanctioned churches or exiled to underground house churches that fell out of the state guidelines. In either way, their history is not under the light. I hope to share their stories by conducting close interviews and cooperating with the Freedom Archive to make them more accessible to a wider public. Basically, to feature stories and voices unconditionally. Together, strike down the oppression in the process of deciding what to preserve as history per se. And finally, I want to conclude my proposal of the project using two sentences that I think convey the essence of my project. Erasure of history is a form of violence, but learning from the past and vocalizing for the silence is resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiki, for a wonderful presentation. So let's hand it back to Sarah to offer some concluding remarks, and then we'll depart from there.
Hi Jeffrey, I believe we have a final speaker, don't we?
Oh, my apologies. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much, Kiki, for your project proposal. And it's truly inspiring. And now let's move on to our final speaker, Eleanor Lemon, who will present her research on how cultural traditions influence modern medicine from a Chinese perspective. Eleanor's work examines the profound impact of cultural traditions on contemporary medical practices, highlighting the rich interplay between heritage and innovation in healthcare. And as we proceed with these enlightening presentations, we encourage everyone to engage actively. We will be awarding a special prize to a member of the audience who asks a question or makes a comment demonstrating a profound understanding of the topics presented. We are looking for insights that spark meaningful dialogue and offer fresh perspectives. And please remember to stay with us until the end for a chance to win one of the 10 Amazon gift cards in our exciting raffle. Your chance to win is just around the corner, so don't miss out. And thank you all for being here today and for your commitment to explore these incredible ideas. So without further ado, let's welcome Eleanor Lemon.
Hi, are you able to hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Eleanor Lemon. I am a rising junior at the Taft School in Connecticut, but I'm from Maine. I am so grateful to be speaking at today's summit and really enjoyed the well-researched presentations I've heard so far. Today I hope to introduce you to a paper I wrote researching how cultural traditions influence modern medicine within East Asia. So my inspiration to conduct research within this topic really stems from the coronavirus pandemic. I have always been someone very fascinated by international law and politics, and the inherent divergence in the ways that countries respond to the pandemic hence really interested me. Found myself wondering, why are they different? Fundamentally, why do we respond and act in such different manners when faced with this emergency? And what makes us so different? Conducting research on this led me to understand connections between tradition and modernity in the medical field. So I opened my paper by discussing the ways in which healthcare finds itself embedded within and intertwined with culture today. In Chinese medicine, acupuncture and herbal medicine are traditional healing methods that are used by doctors and families today. But this is really just scratching the surface. Modern medicine is influenced by cultural traditions in so many facets globally. Globalization and the international transaction of culture have also caused an intersection of culture and heritage across borders within East Asia. Moxibustion, a type of traditional Chinese healing practice, is found in surrounding countries now, including Japan and Korea. Applying this to a circumstance we're all familiar with, the COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to analyze what this looks like now in modern legislation. So before I begin my research, I would like to introduce you my thesis statement. In my paper, I argue that as the world is faced with one of the most defining tests of a country's healthcare system, referring of course to the pandemic, studying the responses of different countries reveals how the legislation of different aspects of culture has cultivated underlying similarities in government responses. So let me begin by introducing the Chinese response to the coronavirus pandemic. When the coronavirus hit Wuhan, the Chinese Ministry of Health introduced a zero COVID policy. To briefly summarize this policy, anyone who tested positive for the virus was immediately sent to local hospitals, and all close contacts were mandated to quarantine within their homes. Contact tracing app shows an individual's possible exposure to the virus using a traffic light system, green meaning a low risk and red of course signifying the opposite. The government also imposed large-scale testing and localized lockdown, which kept the initial death toll relatively low. However, upon the policy's removal in December 2022, this number really skyrocketed. Studying this from an objective lens, I read both praise and criticism of the system. Praise primarily surrounded the rapid response and deployment of healthcare resources, and criticism termed the policy draconian, and it drew international skepticism due to the lack of transparency and censorship surrounding it. No matter your personal perspective of the policy, I argue that it can be foundationally viewed as an act of containment. It aims for a quick, clean eradication of the virus and has its roots in preventative medicine. So I would like to briefly introduce 3 examples which aim to highlight the importance of preventative healthcare within Chinese culture. First, we have the concept of Zhi Wei Bing. This refers to the implementation of preventative medicine to prevent the onset of a disease, and is an important part of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. This dates back to the esoteric scripture of the Yellow Emperor, an ancient Chinese medicinal text with its roots in 475 to 225 BCE. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the concept of yin and yang. This emphasizes elements in equilibrium, which is believed to promote good health. Achieving the balance of an individual's energy was believed to prevent one from disease and ill fortune, which once again is reminiscent of these signs of preventative healthcare. Thirdly, customs surrounding food. In ancient China, the Chinese solar terms, most notably, were used by people with analysis of the sun's position and weather to highlight important dietary traditions. This helped one to gain the right nutrition and bodily balance relevant to the season, which aims to prevent someone from falling ill. Finding connections in such a somewhat unlikely pairing, modern medicine and culture, has shown to me how important culture truly is. It is such a multi-dimensional concept with so much nuance internationally, history, and tradition, and is so important to be used as a lens when studying global legislation and phenomena today. Not only does this help us to gain perspective of our roots, it allows us to see how our heritage permeates into our thinking and daily life. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you all have a good day or night ahead.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and that concludes the two-day forum of East Asia Youth Summit 2024. Thank you so much for everyone's support. And today, the Tencent livestream Xiaotong reached more than 700 audience members, 2 times that of yesterday's. Thanks to our professors, musicians, activists, and educators, we learn about China's social reforms in the past century, literature works during the poets' exiles, anecdotes from first-generation Chinese immigrants to the US, women's shifting identities in Japan, social forms reflected by cinematic works, comparative music studies between East Asia and the West, and finally, Buddhism across different parts of China. Different parts of Asia, sorry. As East Asian youth and, more importantly, global citizens, we must recognize and celebrate this heritage and diversity of thought, art forms, and ways of life. That remains EAYS's mission, and I'm happy it has come true through the intellectual talks over the past 2 days. Lastly, the awards for individual students who have presented analytical thought and engagement with speakers through questions will be communicated through email in the coming week. So if you submitted a proposal, please expect an email announcement over the next few days. Thank you again for your participation and support, and we hope to see you again in 2025.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a good run, albeit a long one. All right. If you have any questions, please stay behind. We'll be happy to answer them for you. Otherwise, have a good night or day, depending on where you are.